I'm going to show you how to print, cut, and assemble your PDF pattern. The first thing you need to do is download the pattern to your computer, and then you're going to open it in Adobe Reader. You can print it straight out of your computer, and you want to make sure that you have your print screen set at 100% or none. You don't want these pages scaled at all because they will end up not matching up if they're scaled down or up. Now, I wanted to point out before we get started with this is that you do not need to print these color-heavy pages. Pages 1, which is the cover, all the way through this one, which is page 9, are just instructions and pretty pictures, and I understand that they're very color heavy and they use up a ton of ink. So if you're concerned with using too much ink and paper, you can read these pages off of your laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone. So leave these aside. We're just going to move these. Oh, before I move these out of the way, I want to point out that refer to page 3. At the top where it says prepare the paper patterns, there is a guide on which pattern pages you need to print per your size. So for example, if you're sewing a size 2, you have different pages to print than if you're sewing a size 7. So just make sure you read this first before you start, because you don't want to waste all that paper and ink printing unnecessary sizes. So just print the sizes that you need, referring to this guide. Let's put this back in here. So these are your paper pattern pieces. I'm going to show you how to assemble piece B. But first of all, before I start cutting this out, I want to point out that each one of these pages is going to have a 1x1 test square. What you do with this is just to make sure your pattern printed at 100%. So just take once you test one of them, it's in all of them just in case, because sometimes maybe you run out of paper or something, then you gotta start it up again. But if you print it continuously, then, and if your first one works out, the rest of it, you don't have to measure each one. The rest of it should work out just fine. So once you have your pattern printed out, just take a ruler and put it right up against your 1-inch square. And if it measures 1x1, you are good to go. So today we're going to assemble piece B. I've already cut out most of the pieces, but I'm going to show you how to cut the top of it. So what you need to do first is notice that the pattern pieces have a color guide for each size. So every size from 12-month all the way to 8-9 has a different line width, a different line style, and even different color. But don't worry if you don't have a color printer, or if you don't want to use your color inks on your printer. You can absolutely print this in black and white, because each line looks different than the next. You'll be able to follow along without even having to worry about the color of the line. I've also included size labels at each size, like you see right here, so that there won't be any confusion as to which size you're cutting, even if all of your lines are black. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble size 2, because that is the size of the dress we're sewing today. So what you want to do is cut along the size that you're sewing. So in this case, size 2 line. These are my pink dashed lines, but you want to include this shaded. See, each piece has a set of shaded boxes at the top, sometimes just at one side or sometimes at both. You want to include that when you cut it, because that's how you're going to overlap and assemble your piece. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out at my size 2T size. And take your time cutting these, because you don't want to cut it on the outside or on the inside of the line. You want to cut right on the lines so that all of your pieces will eventually align perfectly. It really goes faster than you think. There is that one. And as you see, when I get to the bottom, I'm just going to cut straight across that gray shaded box, right on the edge. So there's the top of your pattern piece. The rest of your paper you can recycle. So I'm going to show you now how to assemble this piece because this is the one that looks a lot like all of the other pattern pieces. So once you know how to put this one together, you'll be able to put the other ones together, no problem. So you have B1 and B2, then B3, then 4 and 5. I'm gonna get these out of the way so I can show you what I'm doing here. So first of all, you will overlap B1 over B2, and you can go over or under. It doesn't matter if you go over or under as long as that shaded box is perfectly overlapped. You don't want to tape them like this because then your pattern piece will be much longer. Once you tape them all like that, it'll end up being like an inch longer than it needs to be. So you want to overlap them perfectly, match up those edges. And you'll see that once you overlap it just like this, that curve from the arm just matches up so perfectly. If you were overlapping it like this, it doesn't match up so nicely. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Once you have your pieces perfectly overlapped, you can just go ahead and tape. You can use any regular tape. Doesn't have to be anything special. And you don't need a whole lot of tape for this. Maybe you can just tape the edges like this. Then you can overlap B2 over B3. Everything is marked. As you see over my shaded boxes, it says overlap with B3. So this is my B2 piece. I'm overlapping with B3, and my B3 piece says overlap with B2. So it's all very clearly marked for you. Let's go ahead and overlap this just like this. And you'll see that my lines just match up so perfectly right here on this edge. And tape. I'll put one right here in the center and another little piece over here. Now when I have a vertical seam right here on my pages, I like to overlap and tape these first before I tape the whole thing here, because it's just easier for me to do it this way. And I'm sure you'll find it easier too. So I'm going to overlap these two pieces just like this. And then put a little piece of tape here, here, here. And now we've got this full piece that we can overlap onto here. When I have a darker square just like this, I like to match up that square first. And then everything just falls right into place. Look how nicely aligned my lines are right here. And then just go ahead and tape it just like this. So piece B is finished and ready to cut out of fabric. So now I will show you what all the rest of the pieces look like. Piece A, let's move this to the side. Piece A is my front center panel. This is the panel that gets pin tucked. Then there's piece B, the one that we just made. This is the front side panel. Then you have piece C. A lot of these pieces look so much alike, but you'll see that they're either wider or longer or have a different neckline or something. So you do need to make each one of them. Piece C is the back panel. And then you have piece D is the front lining. E is the back lining. Then we have this teeny tiny piece is called the placket. This is that little piece that goes in the front. You will not need to tape anything together on this one. Once you have it cut, that is your entire piece. So this is going to save you a lot of time. And then last but not least, this is what we call the button stitch guide. This is not technically considered a pattern piece because you're not cutting it out of fabric. You will use it later on in the pattern to line up and get your buttons and buttonholes lined up against your button plackets. So these are your 7 pieces, and once you have everything cut and assembled, you're ready to start cutting out your fabric pieces.